Okay, I think I'm recording now. It's not like WebEx where a little orange light shows you. Okay, this is very much a work in progress. This is one of the areas I've started looking at since I finished the PhD. Now, it's not just a work in progress for me, it's a work in progress in general in the world of internet research. It's dynamic. As we know, the internet changes every day. We could walk out of here and discover there's a new technology that we didn't know about when we walked in this morning. So research, the ethics in researching these new technologies have to be updated all the time. And an awful lot of what I'm saying, an awful lot of the issues I'll raise, in actual fact, most of the issues that I'm going to talk about now, there's not necessarily a right answer. We're looking for the answers, but we're dealing with what is still only about 30 years old, a technology that didn't exist when some of us were born. What I'm saying now could be out of date tomorrow, but I'm putting questions to you, and we'll see. I'll move on. We'll see how it is as we go along. So I want to start off by emphasising that we're not starting with new ethics. There's decades of research into ethics decades of literature into research and ethical research. We're building on that. Of everything we learned, all the principles that you've learned in the modules and all the principles in the literature, they're not being thrown out. We're building on them. They have to be applied to the internet research. That is what the challenge is today. So I'm starting off by just pointing out the university's position on ethics. Let me emphasise, nothing I say here today should contradict anything you've already been taught or anything that's in the university's Research Ethics and Integrity Code of Practice. If anything I say seems to contradict it, ignore me. Okay, then I'll move on to look at some of the current thinking from the literature, and there's a bibliography at the end. So this book, I'm sure you're all very familiar with it. I know Bernadette will have introduced you to it. Nick will have introduced you to it. That's the link to the website. It's the University Research Ethics, and this is 215 to 218 issue. It's available for all of us. Now, this particular book is based on the Concord to support research integrity. Okay. In the university's ethics book, the introduction, the picture of it there, the university recognises its obligations under the Concordat to support research integrity. This is a document that was issued by Universities UK. Okay, it's a national guide to ethics in research. Now, the reason I quote this is because one of the main sections of the university's document is this, the ethical principles for the conduct of research, and this is a direct quote from the Concordat to support research integrity. So these 4 principles that we're talking about: honesty in all aspects, including honesty with the people you're researching, and honesty in presenting your findings; rigour, that you uphold all the principles to the best of your ability, both again in your research and in your conclusions; transparency and openness with your subjects and with what you report; and at all times care and respect for yourself and for the participants. All of these will then be applied, or we will seek to apply all of these in our internet research. Now, the university doesn't have a specific document about internet ethics, but it recommends a publication by the British Psychological Society. So I'm going to have some quotes from them as well. And again, they're still, as I said, they're still guidelines because we're still learning. And with the internet, we're going to run into situations we haven't come across before. We'll run into situations that simply do not exist in the offline world. And as I said at the beginning, there's not always easy answers. Some of them there is no answers. So some of the time we've got to look at each case individually. But the bottom line, care and respect for the participants. All the literature emphasises this as when in doubt, and you will be many a time if you're involved in internet research, you will have to ask yourself, is it this, is it X, is it Y, is it A, is it B? care and respect for the individual. Can it harm this person if I publish this, is the bottom line. Okay, so the first two lines there, you could summarise most of these points into do positive good, do no harm, protect the participants' rights. This is a direct quote from the university's document. All the stuff that we're already used to. Sorry, I should have got some water. Ensure you've consent, avoid deception, debriefing, and so on. Allow the person to back out, confidentiality, and how do you store the data. Now, this one is probably more important than it may be in the past because we now have the Data Protection Act to consider. And I'll talk about that a bit as we go along. Okay, let's move on to the literature review. Thank you, Maria. Now, the first two, I'll talk about the Association of Internet Researchers in a minute. The British Psychological Society, they have a very good documentation that's linked to on the university website, on their university website. There's a link to that document. It's very good guideline. So I'd recommend it if you're anyway interested in it. There is also an International Journal of Internet Research Ethics, and there's numerous papers. You'll get papers on JSTOR about internet research ethics, but quite honestly, they all say the same thing. Everything you need at this point in time, everything you need is in the three documents I'm going to talk about here. Now, the Association of Internet Researchers is probably the biggest organisation in terms of internet research. It's online, obviously. It has a huge email list, and it's very, very, very active. It's very up to date. If you're interested in researching the internet, I would recommend you sign up to that immediately. They have a large document on research ethics on the internet, and it's updated on a regular basis. Now again, they emphasise that, as they say, we're not reinventing the wheel. We're using what's there, we're trying to apply it to new venues, new contexts, new forms of interaction. This, of course, brings up new questions with possibly new answers. So why is it so different? I have avoided going into cyberspace, so I'm just going to stick with this. It's a new territory, okay? So a direct quote from the president of the Association of Internet Researchers, Annette Markham: novel research terrain brings with it novel difficulties. And another question, this is just from a paper: can methods devised for researching the offline world be used for a different environment? So internet media research, IMR, it brings challenges that we're not used to. Okay, I won't go into them right now because there's more examples as we move along. But the technology, as I said, is changing all the time. And going back to first principles, going back to the principles we learned about offline research is where we get the answers. So the challenge: to explore brave new worlds using the tried and trusted rulebook of the old world, or how do we apply the rules to situations that could not be foreseen when the rulebook was being written? So what is internet research? It's all of these things, and different rules will apply depending on what particular part of the internet we're on. And we have a news website, we have a commercial website, a personal website, blogs, forums, email, all this different social media, a chat room, an online survey, whois.net, which tells us who owns any individual website that's up on the internet. All of them are forms of internet research. So let's look at some text examples. Again, Annette Markham says the internet is now an umbrella term for numerous devices, technologies and social spaces. So if you look at all that list, each one of those could be considered internet research. Some of them more obvious, like somebody's website, Facebook posts, tweets, maybe something you got in a personal email, or how about the number of hits a website has, someone's search engine history, an online survey. I'm going to fast through that because that just goes through more examples. Not platform specific, Whether we use it on a desktop or a mobile phone, it's still internet research. So, two types of internet research. We're looking at what David Silver calls the age-old division between theory and practice. So the theory, if we're researching the internet itself, if we're looking at blogs, if we're looking at how these things are constructed, how they're used, we're researching how the internet is being used. Or alternatively, we can be conducting research but using the internet as a medium. Online interviews, surveys, email, cyberstalking. I'm sure you know what I mean by cyberstalking, following someone's path around the internet, websites, taking quotes from websites. So the British Psychological Society says it's any research involving the remote acquisition of data from or about human participants using the internet and its associated technologies. So while you may not be doing a dissertation that focuses entirely on internet research, it is highly likely that internet research is going to come into your research in some form or other. Like most of us are going to get some information off websites. So somewhere in your research, it's likely to arise. So research using the internet, two types. Reactive, where we're dealing with the other individual there. We're dealing with a person. An online survey, an interview, an email. We know there's another person at the end. We're talking to them. They're answering back. Non-reactive. The person may not even know we are researching them. And this is maybe where we start having to ask ourselves about ethical issues. If we're looking at comments in a blog, a forum, a Facebook post, we're looking at, for example, someone's search engine history. Think of some of the things you've put into your search engine, some of the things or people you've Googled. I mean, it may not be illegal, immoral or fattening, but would you want us all to know every single thing or person you've ever Googled? Mm-hmm. The IP address. Who has come from where? Who has come to which website from where? Would you want your IP address to be linked to every single website you've ever been on? I mean, the answer for all of us is no, we wouldn't. Okay, so like Markham's comment there, these are new situations that did not exist in offline. So how do we apply the principles that we've dealt with up until now? If you remember the slide I had a little bit back there, the ethical principles for the conduct of research, they were honesty, rigour, transparency, confidentiality, care and respect. This is usually referred to as AOIR. They have come up with a similar version and they've looked at them in connection with online research. So I'm going to look at each one of these individually. So privacy, just another quote from the document. In the same online space or in the same online group, some users may believe their words are important public documents and they should receive credit as authors, while others might believe their contributions are private, deserving anonymity. Likewise, the service provider, operator of an online forum or terms of service may state that the content is public, but the individual may perceive the space to be private. As this says here, in offline research, we've usually a fairly good idea if something is in the public sphere or if it's in the private sphere. When we're online, they're no longer two discrete categories. It's more a spectrum with public on one end and private on the other. And things fall at all different places on that spectrum. And probably more crucial, people's perception of where they are on that spectrum can differ. Like we'll come up with here again and again from different places is where what one person thinks is relatively public, another may think is relatively private. So the distinction between public and private, though, is becoming increasingly blurred. It's not always easy to know how your subject sees it, whether that person perceives it as public or private. To some people, if it's on the internet, it's public. That doesn't mean we can quote it. Okay, the ability to track a person. We can now, what I called cyber stalking a minute ago, that issue did not exist in offline research. So can we ethically follow a person, follow their movements, whether we put in our research or not? Is it ethical to come by information that we've got via cyber stalking? Now, as I said, I'm not saying I have the answer. I'm not expecting you to answer either. It's one of the many questions that comes up. We didn't go to a person and ask them would they be part of our research. We found them and we knew they'd be in X place at a certain time and did a certain thing, are interested in a certain thing because we tracked their movements on the internet. Is that ethical? It was publicly available information, but is it ethical? Okay, so as I said, the bottom line, what we come across again and again, and is repeated again and again in the documents, when in doubt, consider the extent to which undisclosed observation may have potentially damaging effects on participants. Another point you'll see frequently mentioned is when in a forum or whether in a Facebook group, go to the group admin, go to the group moderator. They will tell you not just how best to approach the group, but they will know whether the group is generally considered a private or a public group, regardless of its privacy setting on Facebook. And to remember, when with web pages, copyright remains with the author, or in some cases, the hosting company. So, particular to Facebook, is the researcher's classification the same as that of the person who, or classification of privacy the same as the person who posted it? If a group has public settings, are there still personal issues discussed in it? Do the participants feel that it is private? When you quote something anonymously, there is very often enough information to identify the person. If you're researching astrologers, that becomes more true. We're quite a small community. There are certain groups of people who could be harmed if their identity was revealed, and this is also very, very true of astrologers. In my research, I had quite a lot of people saying to me that are putting in the questionnaire, speaking to me in an interview, saying they had to be completely anonymous and there could be no identifying information because 3 or 4 of them lived in very fundamental Christian areas in the United States and they would be ostracised from their community if their identity was known. That came up more often than I'd actually expected it to. And someone else from, I won't say because it's a small place, but someone else from a part of Europe where the same applied. Okay, so, okay, I think I've more or less mentioned that. And bear in mind that quoting without permission from Facebook, we're in breach of the Data Protection Act because we're using something for a use other than which it was intended. Okay, so if we move on to valid consent. Again, a quote, valid consent should be obtained where it cannot be reasonably argued that online data can be considered in the public domain. Now, if you are looking at a forum or a chat room or Facebook, getting valid consent from the person means, first of all, you've got to find out who they are. And that is not always that easy. You've got to get information about them that is not obvious online. For example, their age. Can you be sure they are an adult? Because if they're underage, then it's a different ballgame altogether. In an online questionnaire, you can get them to tick the checkbox saying they agree, but make sure they also tick a checkbox saying that they fully understand their rights to anonymity and to withdrawal. The literature recommends that you don't have long consent procedures because they won't read them, and it is important that they understand what they're getting themselves into. With online research, you cannot guarantee confidentiality and you cannot guarantee anonymity, and your participants need to be informed of that. A hacker can identify anything on the internet. Someone's email, they can identify, they can hack into a WebEx. The hosting company can easily access it without hacking it. Okay? And any information you collect online has identifying information, even if it's just their ISP. So the participants need to be informed of that. If your email is not encrypted, you're breaching confidentiality. If you quote from the internet, it can be traced quite easily. You can paraphrase it, but that does require you to interpret what they said rather than saying what they actually said. Fair treatment, make sure that you give them the same debriefing as an offline participant, that they know what it's about, what their data will be used for, anonymity and confidentiality as much as possible. Now, the right to withdraw from the study, but make sure they know when that right expires. There's no point in them withdrawing after you've submitted your dissertation. Okay? And a practical issue, if the connection goes down on an online interview, did the person just decide they'd had enough, or was it the broadband? It's a good idea to set up exit procedures at the start. Agree with them at the beginning what you will do in that event. Okay, so some of the issues we've talked about that are specific to the internet, some different ones. With internet research, we can have participants from all over the world. Now, something that might be considered not sensitive or not put the participant at risk in Western Europe, it may be a totally different ball game in the Near East or the Middle East. So know where your participant is from before you identify them, before you quote them. What is a human subject? How about an avatar on Second Life that has a false name, but there's a person behind it? Is it human? Is a person's digital data a version of the individual? A person's blog and a comment, is that just a comment on a website, or is that a person feeling that there's a part of themselves in there? If you're not clearly and obviously dealing with a person, for example, I mentioned earlier their search engine history, or their surfing behaviour, their browser history, collected from a bot or from a robot. Is that a person, or is it a piece of data? I don't mean the robot, I mean the actual information. What's public, what's private, we more or less talked about. What's formal and is it a formal sphere, is it an informal sphere? Even if an astrologer making a weekly post may be promoting their work, on the same post you may have a person talking to what they consider friends about the effects on their love life of Mercury retrograde. Who owns the person's blog? Copyright may be with the hosting company. How does your presence in a Facebook group affect the participants? Is it likely to maybe result in some people withdrawing from the group or avoiding from posting? May they feel violated? Do you know the information you're getting is any use whatsoever? If a person is in an astrology group and says, yes, I'm an astrologer, but I don't use the moon in my charts, do you know that person is actually an astrologer? Can you come up with this amazing piece of data? Some astrologers don't use the moon. Now, I'm being deliberately silly here, but you get the point. And how easy is it to get informed consent from participants? In my experience of researching Facebook groups, it was actually quite difficult. Quite a lot of people just didn't want me to do it, for the reason that I actually didn't put any direct posts from Facebook groups. And again, are you sure of the age of your participants? Where will your data be stored? Is it safe? Is it securely protected? Is there any chance that anybody else will find it or reuse it? If you're storing it on the internet, how is it protected? If it's in your Dropbox, can it be hacked? If you decide to take some stuff out of the information, for example here, a person X is a member of a marijuana users Facebook group and agrees to be part of the study and to be in quotas. They say that they use marijuana several times a day despite living in a country where the practice is illegal because it brings relief from pain associated with a sensitive medical condition which they wouldn't want people to know about. So you take out the reference to the medical condition and you're left with person X state that they use marijuana several times a day despite living in a country where the practice is illegal, full stop. No, I'm not saying I have a problem with that, but you could be getting the person in some legal difficulties. Okay, now that's the bibliography, which is there, but Bernadette asked us to end with some questions, which I've done. Okay, so I have two questions you may want to think about. What is the boundary between a human subject and a piece of data? An interview with a person online, maybe that's clear. A Facebook post in a private group or from a Facebook friend. A Facebook post on a public page, a tweet, a quote from a person's website, a comment on a blog, a statement on a website from an unnamed person, a person's browsing history. Where I said there's a spectrum between what's public, what's private, between what's human and what's a piece of data. Well, between the human and the piece of data, where is that boundary? And the other one, if you quote a comment from an unidentified person in a public space, most of the literature feels you're safe enough in quoting that. But if that's a comment and an unidentified person in a chat room, is that the same? Are you still able to quote that? Okay, I'm done.
Questions with answers. Who is guilty of breaching internet ethics?
I think we all are.
Yeah.
Nick?
Can you put the bibliography back?
Sorry?
Can you put the bibliography?
Yeah, of course I can.
Please?
You have to force it in for the interviews. You have the ethical form you have to fill in before doing interviews, but it might be expanded with this.
Well, don't forget, Paul, as I said, the same principles that they still apply.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they might even do an extra page with the ethical form you have to fill in and get the proof for. Yeah.
It's not my decision.
No,
I don't know. Nick, did you have a question?
No, I just want to point out that actually, I believe one of the requirements is that your data be destroyed. And nobody can destroy their data these days.
No.
So, in fact, 100% of all researchers breach data protection guidelines.
If we were to be really, really strict on that, like if we're doing incredibly sensitive data, there is data destruction software you can buy. There's some freeware, but it's not as thorough as the proprietary brands. You can buy data destruction. That it just basically overwrites it with X, then it overwrites everything with Y, and then everything with Z, and forms like that. No, if it was very, very important, you can do it, yeah.
There's a counterpoint of view that says that to destroy data is fundamentally against all the principles of sound academic research. And I'd say probably a majority of academics would agree with that.
Well, it's like anything. I mean, you'll never. By the time you finish the dissertation about the PhD, you've probably only derived 10% of all the data that's in, of all the information that's in that raw data.
Yeah.
There's probably so much more that you just didn't need, and yeah.
Which one returns to it?
Yeah.
That's why you don't want to destroy it.
Yeah.
If students thinking I haven't seen that ethics book from TSD, it's because they only brought it out right at the end of last year, even before we did ethics RCC. That booklet was new, and the data protections. So that's only very recent. This was the end of 2015. Just in case you haven't seen it, that's why.
Okay.
And this is also why when you fill out your ethics forms, if you're doing an anthropologically based dissertation, you think, I can't stand her that she's making me jump through all these freaking hoops with ethics. It's because the ethics community keeps changing its boundaries, just what you were saying, trying to embrace this.
Yeah.
Every time we put in a form, it's almost like we've got another thing we have to incorporate. And so now I've actually put up on the dissertation Moodle page a step-by-step guide of how to fill out the ethics for the dissertation to get it through, to get it accepted. And then probably you can be guaranteed to have it come back through me, asking for some minor corrections. And it's just, you just do it. Because it is, what I've discovered is this absolute fluid thing. And they're still trying to find boundaries, and because the academics who give the ethics approval, and it has to go to the head of school, they keep trying to pass it up the chain because they don't want to be responsible if your work goes wrong and there's an ethical problem. So they keep trying to get a higher and higher authority. Now the head of school has to sign off on your ethics forms at the dissertation level. So it's sort of, it is a very fluid situation. But I have put a lot of work into good rapport, right, with the people, and it flows fairly smoothly now. Although it is actually, just for all the reasons you've said, it is this. And indeed, if they had this lecture on internet ethics, I think we'd get considerably even
Well,
harder.
I would say it's almost impossible to.
Yeah, it's almost
You will,
impossible.
if you're doing internet research, you will run into situations that you couldn't possibly have thought of, that no
I
one's
didn't even know
foreseen.
you could track someone's footprints over the internet. But then I'm a naive, you know, like.
Yeah. Oh, it's called cyber stalking. It's there's people spend days doing it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's scary.
Any question? There's a question for
Yeah.
Helen.
Yeah, just to let you know, following on from what you just said, Bernadette, I used to stalk people on the internet as part of my job.
Oh, with the police.
Ah,
Dang.
Yeah.
It's done a lot more than people realise.
yeah.
And you'll never find out because they use COVID computers, fictitious ISP addresses, fictitious profiles. They're there and they're gone.
The stalkers.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's very cleverly done, and I would think now, obviously I'm not there anymore, but now with the increase of terrorist activity in Europe, I would think, although I've only worked in the UK, but they're probably doing it a lot more now.
Yeah.
I can't see that they wouldn't be of increase because of that. And it's particularly done on social network.
I think
They want to
it's
see
yeah.
who people are associating with, what they're saying, and that's the only way they can do it really.
Yeah.
Yes, it's now one's personal computer is public. That's what I always consider.
It is absolutely.
Yeah.
Like if even the
Even if Nick and I have to have a slightly more confidential conversation, we never do it by email. Right?
Yeah.
Meet for a coffee. Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Very careful what you say.
Darling.
Even though it seems like it's an absolute minefield, I mean, I've read Liz Hathaway's dissertation and she was using the internet to source some of her responses. Once you understand what you've laid out so clearly, and I think it's fantastic, Frances, well done you. You can know, if you stick with that, you know with absolute certainty that if you're applying those rules to gather your data, that you're absolutely protected within that structure. So there's a certain security in using that. And then you can confidently use the qualitative data to make some statements, to make some research, valid research. So
Yeah, I think like yeah, it's as you said, it's being aware of the implications. That things are not as straightforward. Just have a look at how things change online. But yeah, I think once you're aware of it, and there's a keep going on to the bottom line, can this harm the person?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, if you just take it back 10 years, we had to do that when we were doing questionnaires. You know,
Yeah.
we thought, oh gosh, you know, there's so much to fill out. People have to tick so many boxes that they agree, and you can use this, you can't use that, etc. A similar sort of thing, much simpler, but this has just become escalated because the reach is wider.
Yeah.
The counterpoint of that is now we have a lot more data at our fingertips.
Yes. It's a lot people all over the world. Yeah.
I think you've laid it out, as you've just said, Darren, really nicely in terms of this can help people become aware of where there's a potential ethical issue to you know, and do as much as possible to get permission. And if you can't get permission, even no matter how good the data is, you just have to push delete.
Yeah. One of the things. Oh, sorry, how's that gone?
When you publish something like, let's say you take one of the books and you put in a post like 5 lines, and who holds the copyright of those lines that you post on Facebook?
Mark Zuckerberg does.
What?
Facebook.
Facebook owns that?
Mm.
Because
You put up a photo, they own it.
I remember I publish books online too, and once when we tried to upload it in Amazon, a number of years before we quoted, someone asked to quote a couple of pages from that book in a website, and Amazon detected the same content that I was uploading that is being uploaded before. They kind of match it. They check the whole internet, and we had an issue. We couldn't. I mean, we had to show that the historic thing of that post, because if someone posts before you or you put it online, there might be issues, you know, legal issues, or at least big companies can say, like Amazon,
Yeah.
someone did it before you, and then they call the copyright. So also ask for, if you publish things.
It's a bit like Turnitin, really, isn't it? Yeah. Actually, one thing I didn't go into because I didn't think I'd have enough time is that old concept that different rules apply on the internet, that the rules of the offline world don't apply there. And it's not so much that people think they can get away with things on the internet that can get off in the offline world. It's just that some of the principles that it's difficult to apply them. That they cannot be. It's seen as this sort of fluid, anonymous thing that it's almost like it's not worth the effort. But I mean, even in legal circles, there's different laws for online. There's the whole thing of cyber law, different laws for online world compared to the offline world. Because even today in legal circles, there's still the view that they're two different worlds.
It's almost like, when something is printed, it's something that, the person who's, the author can't take it back, but the internet is almost like it has this ambivalent status where, it can be changed or it can be altered, so it's more almost in real time.
Yeah.
Like if I'm thinking in my research, if I can use a booklet or a leaflet published by a network, and that's almost like fine because it's been printed, but if it's on a website, that can change. So I can say I accessed it on a certain day, but the content is not, I don't know, it doesn't have like a permanence almost that the printed word.
No, it doesn't.
And that makes it more human-like, which is what I think I really like this, what you said, this has, if it's a digital self, because the content can change and almost grow, like as if it's alive.
Yeah.
Excellent. I think it's time for tea. Although, a question, sorry.
Thank you.
It is Thomas Jobbermore normally speaking, but on the second night of summer we mostly go to a Thai restaurant, the group of us. So who is going to come along? Let's make a reservation. If you and I suggest about 7 o'clock being there.